it is. I've heard. The committee will come to order. This is a rather vacant room. The attending physician has recommended that we hold as hearings with as few people as possible in attendance at the hearing. These hearings are available via the C-SPAN, and those who want to watch this and listen to the hearing, they can certainly do so on the C-SPAN channels. I want to thank our witnesses for bringing only essential staff, and I have one staff. Doug, you have one staff with us?
I have people that are essential that are not here. I don't want their self-esteem to suffer.
Well said, and I'll just say, me too. Now, those who really want to come into the room, it's an open hearing. You're welcome to do so. Well, you can do so. Welcome is another matter, but you certainly can come to the hearing. Let us go ahead and get started. Opening statement. I'll probably do most of this because it's relevant to all the things that we need to cover here. Today, the subcommittee will hear from the Assistant Secretary of Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, the Vice Chair of Naval Operations, and the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps on the state of the Navy and Marine Corps readiness and how the fiscal year 2021 operation and maintenance budget supports training, weapons system maintenance in alignment with the National Defense Strategy. For the past several years, we have heard concerns about the state of the Navy and Marine Corps preparedness for great power competition. At the same time, a series of devastating accidents at sea, in the air, and on the ground have illustrated the urgent need to direct sustained attention to training of our personnel and the maintenance of our platform. While my colleagues on the Sea Power Subcommittee may have their own views on this year's smaller shipbuilding budget, I must applaud the Navy for its attempt to protect readiness and the message that this budget sends about the risks of creating a hollow force. As for the Marine Corps, I'd like also to recognize the Commandant's forward-leaning visionary planning guidance and look forward to learning about the sustainment concepts that will support a realigned Marine Corps. There are several issues at the forefront of my mind. I'm extremely troubled that the department, in its wargaming budget planning and public narrative, seems incapable of confronting the deteriorating sea lift capacity. This year, we learned that only 40% of the ready reserve force was able to get underway in Transcom's turbo activation exercise. The decline of the logistics force is an existential threat to our deterrence capability, and this issue cannot be held hostage to institutional paralysis any longer. There have been numerous hearings on this, including yesterday afternoon, and in which we went into this in some depth. We may explore it today also. From the perspective of the subcommittee, this means that we must ensure we are appropriately investing in recapitalizing, maintaining, and manning our sea lift vessels. We must also keep an eye on the ball when it comes to ship maintenance. With only 1/3 of the availabilities delivered on time in recent years, we're still not where we need to be. As Secretary Esper stated in his testimony to the full committee, maintenance challenges are preventing the Navy's force generation model from operating as intended. I look forward to hearing about the plans that the Navy has in fiscal 2021 to improve the timeliness, modernization of the public shipyards and provide force stability and predictability to the private shipyards and invest in building a skilled workforce. This subcommittee has also focused extensively on aviation readiness. While we saw encouraging results from Secretary Mattis's 80% mission capability initiative, the Navy and Marine Corps needs to avoid regressing in the meantime and demonstrate sustained commitment to remedying the problems with depot, throughput, spare parts, and maintenance practices that have motivated this effort in the first place. In addition, I'm deeply concerned about the cost of sustaining the F-35 and the department's lack of access to key technical data necessary for organic maintenance. We will undoubtedly come back and deal with the F-35 in detail at other hearings. I note today it was reported there are 883 flaws in the F-35 system. We're not going to cover all of them today, probably not even one. Finally, we have held several hearings on the tragic ship, aviation, and ground vehicle accidents of the past several years. I note today that the U.S. Army had one death at Fort Irwin yesterday, and the Marine Corps had one death and 2 injuries in an accident in the UAE yesterday. Tragic as it is, we're going to focus on that and deal with it. I'm particularly concerned that the ground vehicle mishaps, which do not involve multi-billion-dollar assets and platforms, often receive less attention. Nevertheless, they are deadly. And when they add up, the numbers are quite large. Training safety is of paramount importance, and we need to prioritize identifying and addressing the root causes of these accidents. I look forward to our discussion today. With that, I turn to Ranking Member Lamborn of Colorado for his opening remarks. Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Chairman Garamendi. Today we will hear testimony regarding the readiness of the Navy and the Marine Corps to execute the National Defense Strategy under the President's fiscal year 2021 budget request. We find ourselves at a critical point where the need to modernize is undeniable, but I am increasingly concerned how we are going to balance modernization with our current readiness needs. Just this week, we learned that the Navy plans to cancel the planned service life extensions for Flight 1 and Flight 2 Arleigh Burke class destroyers. The impact of this decision is that the Navy will lose 27 DDG-51s between 2026 and 34. My understanding is that this decision was driven by cost concerns, but it is unclear how the Navy will recover this capability or how the fleet's readiness will be affected. This is a major deviation from the plan, and I am concerned that the committee was not briefed about this information before it was made public. The Navy has made some progress in improving the cost and schedule performance for ship and submarine maintenance availabilities, mostly through more realistic scheduling by the fleet commanders, level loading work in the shipyards, improving improved contracting practices that all reduce administrative waste and that encourage private industry investment, as well as leveraging data to reduce the amount of unforecasted work. That said, in each of the last two fiscal years, the Navy has requested reprogramming authority in the magnitude of $1 billion to cover shortfalls in its ship depot account. This would lead us to believe that significant improvement is still required. Because approximately 2/3 of ship availabilities complete in the second year, the Navy is requesting $1.3 billion to continue a fiscal year 2020 pilot program that authorizes private contract ship maintenance for the Pacific Fleet through the other procurement Navy account, which is 3-year money. The committee will be watching this pilot closely, as it should improve performance and has the potential to bring costs down. Excuse me. As I stated in the Transcom hearing yesterday, I am deeply concerned about the health of the surge sealift fleet. By the mid-2030s, over half of which will be unusable. With 85% of the joint force based in the United States, our military readiness is potentially irrelevant without the capability and capacity to project those forces to a fight. The budget request would only fund the purchase of 2 used vehicles, and vessels, and I want to hear from our witnesses what the Navy's investment plan is to address this growing concern. General Berger, the Commandant, has embarked the Marine Corps on a transformation effort to ensure that it is prepared to fight near-peer competitors. His guidance is that, quote, the Marine Corps will be trained and equipped as a naval expeditionary force in readiness and prepared to operate inside actively contested maritime spaces in support of fleet operations, unquote. I fully support this effort, and I will be looking forward to hearing from General Thomas how the Corps will balance this transformation effort with current readiness requirements. As Chairman Garamendi has pointed out, logistics capability would determine our success or failure in a future Pacific fight. We also look forward to learning more about how the Navy and Marine Corps will sustain this future force. Finally, the Navy and Marine Corps have made significant progress with aircraft readiness under the MC-80 construct that Secretary Mattis put in place. The FA-18 and EA-18G fleets have met the 80% mission-capable objective. While the F-35 has not achieved this goal, it has improved from 54% to 72%. The 5th-generation F-35 is a game-changing capability that our warfighters need. We owe it to them to ensure that we get the sustainment for this program right. I continue to have significant concerns about intellectual property issues in this program. We need to have better clarity on the impact that the program will have on service sustainment budgets. So I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamborn. I'd like now to welcome our guest, James Gertz, Assistant Secretary of Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, Admiral Robert Burke, Vice Chief of Naval Operations, and General Gary Thomas, Assistant Commandant, United States Marine Corps. Mr. Gertz, if you'd care to start.
Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lamborn, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the readiness posture of the Department of the Navy. Before I begin, I would like to express the Department's deepest condolences to the family members of the servicemen who tragically lost their lives in recent days. Their sacrifice for our nation serves as a stark reminder of the gravity of our responsibilities to our warfighters. Properly maintained, equipped, and manned ships and aircraft are critical to ensuring the Navy and the Marine Corps are ready to respond when called. The FY21 budget request sustains the commitments to improve readiness made in FY17 all the way through FY20. With consistent funding, we've stopped the decline in readiness, and we're seeing positive indicators that our maintenance initiatives are making a difference. For instance, our aviation depot level periodic maintenance interval inspection cycles on the F-18 are over 57% faster. Our supply chain is more robust, and our maintenance teams are more efficient. As noted last October, we achieved an 80% mission-capable rate for the F-18EFs. We're applying the same holistic reform approach to ship maintenance in both the public and private yards, making significant changes to our maintenance planning, leveraging modern commercial statistical methods, and using a wide range of contracting options with the authorities this committee has given us so we can properly plan, buy, and execute with stable workforce, and in the process save the Navy and the taxpayer time and money. In the private shipyards, the combination of efforts have taken us from a 37% on-time completion rate to an encouraging 50% current on-time completion rate, and we're forecasting over 70% this year. In our public yards, we've reduced the maintenance backlog delays by 50%. Although we've made significant gains, steady investment and close attention to this issue is required for us to recapitalize and get to where we need to. Our end goal is to deliver our ships and aircraft on time and in full. We look forward to working closely with Congress to achieve that goal, and we thank you for the strong support this subcommittee has always provided our sailors and Marines and their families. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Secretary Gertz. Admiral Burke. Gertz.
Good morning, Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lamborn,
We're
and
going to work on
distinguished
name
members.
pronunciation here. Gertz. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lamborn, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. On behalf of the Chief of Naval Operations and the sailors, civilians, and families of the United States Navy, thank you for inviting me to testify today. Our nation depends on a ready Navy Marine Corps team, and your commitment to the training, maintenance, and modernization of our fleet will ensure not only a Navy ready for today's fight, but also a Navy ready to meet the challenges of tomorrow. We're excited about where we're headed, but we feel a sense of urgency, and we know that we need to go faster. The Navy's distributed maritime operations concept works hand in glove with the Marine Corps' expeditionary amphibious-based operations concept in order to maximize our lethality and complicate things for our adversaries. It's a new way of doing business, and we're experimenting and exercising each and every day, working together as one team, out and about with today's fleet, while at the same time carefully evaluating the details of the capabilities we're going to need to improve the execution of those concepts with a future fleet. That said, our budget top line is essentially flat throughout the future year's defense plan. And accounting for inflation, we really lose buying power. And looking back, that top line has been essentially constant in same year dollars since about 2010. And as you've heard before, it's about enough to keep a fleet of between 305 and 310 ships properly manned, trained, equipped, and maintained. And we're not going to recommend increasing ship numbers if we can't keep them properly equipped, manned, and ready to go out and fight. So given that reality, we prioritized with our 21 budget the Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine first. It's the replacement for our nation's primary strategic deterrent force, and we have to get that ship class out in time. There's absolutely no margin for schedule slip, as the Trident-class submarines, originally designed for a 30-year life, are reaching the end of their 40-plus year extended lifetime. Our next priority is unquestionably readiness. We continue investments to preserve the momentum we've established to ensure that your Navy is fully ready to fight tonight. After that, we're keeping the press on modernization. We continue to invest in those key capabilities that are going to be the game changers for the future fleet: artificial intelligence, hypersonics, unmanned, directed energy, things of that nature. And finally, capable capacity. That's the pursuit that continues. So shipbuilding does remain a priority. On readiness, and I know many of you have been to sea recently and seen this firsthand, we're making good progress, as Secretary Gertz has also just told you. But we have to keep in mind readiness is a long game, and it requires a continued and stable commitment to funding to enable us to overcome years of wartime operating tempo, the budget variability that we've seen, and frankly, the effects of sequestration, which we're still working to overcome. Your continued dedication and attention since the supplemental funding bills in FY17 has made an incredible difference. And the FY21 budget will continue to build on the readiness recovery we began then, and will allow us to continue to train our force for the high-end fight, while we continue to simultaneously press to improve ship, submarine, and aircraft depot maintenance. Efforts like Secretary Gertz described with their naval sustainment system for our FNA 18 Strike Fighter Force, and a whole host of what we call performance to plan programs are being applied across the board, and we're beginning to see results. We're not there yet, but we're on a positive trajectory. On behalf of the sailors, civilians, and the families who make up our Navy team, thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral Burke. General Thomas.
Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lamborn, and distinguished members of this subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you and discuss the readiness of the United States Marine Corps. Along with our Navy partners, we are ready to fight today, while at the same time preparing for the challenges outlined in the National Defense Strategy. The Marine Corps' budget execution over the past 2 years prioritized readiness, recovery, and made key investments in lethality as we turned to great power competition. Stable and predictable funding, combined with your support during our hurricane recovery efforts, have greatly improved readiness, supported our Marines and their families, and sustained important modernization efforts. The FY 2021 budget request sustains the commitment to improve readiness made over the last few years. This request funds our major readiness accounts, allowing for more spare parts, completion of critical maintenance, increased depot throughput, and more flying hours. At the same time, the Marine Corps is focusing on the pacing threat to ensure that we are ready for the future operating environment. Through careful analysis and wargaming, we are developing new warfighting concepts and have identified the need to invest in additional capabilities in support of joint and naval forces. These investments reflect a pivot to a new force design, which we will begin to implement this year. With your support, your Marines will continue to maximize the precious resources that have been entrusted to us. Stable and predictable funding will ensure that the Marine Corps is a ready, modern force that is prepared for a changing strategic environment. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, General. There are a whole series of questions that we have. Mr. Scott, you may not know it, but we are now implementing the advice of the House, and that is to limit access to limit and suggest that people not come to the hearing, but rather to watch the hearing on the television, and that's and staff limitations.
But he's allowed to be here. He's allowed to be here.
Members are allowed to be here, yes. So, and so it goes. A whole series of questions are out there. We should start with what we now see in this committee, which is social distancing. I want to put this to Admiral Burke and to General Thomas. Could you please describe how your Navy and Marine Corps are dealing with the operations in the age of coronavirus? General Thomas, you seem prepared, so jump into it.
Chairman, as you know, we are following, the direction of the CDC and the Department of Defense. The Secretary of Defense just this morning signed, additional guidance that will restrict travel that will hold Marines, soldiers, sailors, and airmen in place for 60 days for Level 3 countries, and then restricting travel for dependents for those Level 2 countries. Within the Marine Corps, we are doing all the things that I think we're starting to see across the country. We're reviewing our disease, containment plans. We are starting to reduce, much like we're seeing here in this committee room, large gatherings. We are implementing measures to screen and quarantine Marines when necessary, and we are also screening at places that are unique in the sense that they bring people from all over the country. For example, entry-level training. Those are the broad steps that the Marine Corps is taking in alignment with the Department of Defense and the Centers for Disease Control.
Thank you, General. Admiral Burke.
Yeah, the main concern for the Navy, like I think all the services, is the well-being of our sailors and their family members. That's our absolute top priority. We're also providing support, as are the other services, to Health and Human Services and the Centers for Disease Control, working under the coordination of U.S. Northern Command. So each of the services are supporting their efforts as needed. And as General Thomas outlined, each of the services are following the CDC guidance as minimum requirements, with implementation above and beyond those requirements as necessary to meet the unique needs of the service. For example, with our ships at sea, we are very sensitive to the fact that we're moving from place to place rapidly. We do not want to be the source of, transmission of the virus. So we put measures in place right away in the Pacific early on, and now it's globally. Ships, once they leave a port, will stay at sea for 14 days, monitoring their crew, ensuring that no symptoms are out there. So effectively a self-quarantine before pulling into another nation, and then monitoring prior to pulling into ports, things of that nature. And then basically all the other things that General Thomas outlined as well, similarly.
Secretary Gertz, anything to add?
Yes, sir. Certainly a little bit of a longer term, but we are taking a close look at all our acquisition programs. We've been working for a long time on supply chain integrity, and so this plays into the supply chain, understanding our supply lines, where we've got fragility, planning forward on that. And so a little longer term, but could be a longer impacting element is going to be that on all of our acquisition and sustainment programs.
Okay. A couple of things. Part of that supply chain are your medicines. Our colleague on this committee, Vicki Holzer, and I have introduced legislation dealing with drugs, the availability of drugs, most of which on the generic side, 90-some% come from China. And that supply chain is already interrupted, and it could be a national strategic problem should China decide they don't want those to come to America. So we're looking at how to develop our own domestic production of those key ingredients for that. And the rest of the supply chain is similarly at risk given this virus. I think I'll go into one other set of questions here, and that has to do with the accidents. I notice in the audience Kathleen, whose fiance was killed in a rollover accident in Camp Pendleton more than a year ago. I'd like all of you, I noticed also a shipboard accidental death occurred over the last couple of days, somebody falling down a stairwell. So let's deal with that issue of accidents, General Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for context, we've, after having 5 years of no vehicle rollovers or serious Class A, we had a spike last year of 3, which include the tragic loss of Lieutenant McDowell, and then we've had also 2 already this year. This is not a resource issue. There are several things that we have done immediately to improve the safety in these instances. We have instituted additional training for the crews manning these vehicles. We've increased the use of our tactical vehicle simulators. And then I think perhaps most helpful would be across our entire training areas, which, as you know, are quite large. We are designating and marking, hazardous terrain as a risk mitigation. And then finally, just in terms of training, we are redoubling our efforts to mitigate risk through a crawl, walk, run approach. We are also, during training, we are building in opportunities for remediation for, could be individuals or crews that need a little bit more training time, and we're emphasizing hazard identification and assessment prior to each training opportunity.
If I recall, in previous hearings, we had asked for an analysis of the accidents and what was the cause and what could have prevented that. I don't believe we've received that yet. So if you could attend to that and provide us with that information of, so how's it going?
Chairman, we'll get you that information this week.
If you would, please. Admiral Burke.
Whether it's major accidents like the McCain and Fitzgerald or minor, aviation incidents, moving aircraft on the deck of an aircraft carrier causing equipment damage, we treat them the same. And fundamentally, the root cause of both those issues is a cultural one where people are either complacent or there's a culture of lack of questioning attitude. People aren't inquisitive about what they're doing and what the ramifications of not doing it properly are. So in the case of the McCain and Fitzgerald, we've talked to you, and I think Vice Admiral Brown was here a month ago talking to you in detail about the actions that came out of our strategic readiness review and our comprehensive review. All of those actions, though, really designed at sort of a three-step process to, first get the surface force safe to operate and then get them to the point where they could operate effectively to get out and get the reps and sets that they needed to build confidence with a goal of turning the quarter of reaching this goal of culture of excellence where every watchstander, every sailor, every team member on every component of team is seeking to become a better version of themselves, seeking to make the team better all the time. They're asking if the procedure's right, if they could optimize it, if they could make it more safe, whatever the objective of that procedure is. And we have places in the Navy where that's done very well. We have places where it just needs to improve, and we're building that culture in. Same thing in aviation maintenance mishaps. We put mechanisms in place. Our Air Boss, Vice Admiral Bullitt Miller, has brought in outside organizations to teach this and build it into the DNA of our maintenance processes and reinforce it as we go and build it into the culture so that it's reinforced at every step. In cases like this, when you're doing complex technical processes, sometimes slower is faster if you're being very deliberate about it and talking through these consequences before you go to the next step. So it's elements like that.
My final question, then I'm going to turn to Mr. Lamborn. Reported in today's review of what's going on in the military is this little note. The Navy mulling taking sailors off forward deployed ships as part of a $40 billion savings drive. Manning forward deployed ships with fewer sailors. We've been working the exact opposite direction, Admiral Burke. What's this all about?
I can't speak to what that article is about. I am not aware of any initiative to reduce manning on forward deployed naval ships. We are working the opposite direction. We've, the average destroyer right now across the Navy, but first was in FDNF forces, Japan and Europe. We've added 25 to 30 sailors per ship, and we're adding more. We're simultaneously growing the Navy, more ships, and we're adding more sailors to every ship because of the things that we learned. I'm not sure what the article is referring to.
Must have been overheard at some bar late at night.
Perhaps. I'll look into it, sir.
Incorrectly reported.
But we are
Mr.
continuing
Lamborn,
to
it's
work
your-
towards improving manning, and we've budgeted for it, and it's a matter of the sessions coming through the training pipelines and getting there.
Thank you, Admiral.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Gertz, the decision to cancel the service life extensions on the DDG 51 class is concerning because if allowed to stand, this will cause the Navy to lose 27 destroyers between fiscal years 2026 and 2034. So what is the business case for this decision, and how will the Navy reconstitute this capability?
Yes, sir, and I apologize up front if that caught the committee off guard, and we should have communicated better with you on that. To put it in perspective, what we're talking about is post-FIDEP changes. So none of these would be until the 26 through 30 area. So that was one of the reasons it didn't get communicated clearly given the shipbuilding plan. We had originally looked at adding service life to destroyers, if you recall, and hearings last year and the year before. That was one of the ways we were increasing the naval size. What this shows you is some of the stark choices the Navy's having to make with a relatively flat line. Service life extensions do add to the size of the fleet, but they kind of just push the cliff to the right, and so you've got to be cautious you don't keep extending forever without building, because eventually you'll run out of an ability to extend. And so it reflected some hard choices we had to make in long-term planning. Having said that, this is a 26 and out piece, and it's something we're going to continue to look at of what's the right business case. My guess as we go closer to that, we made some pretty big swings from 35 to 45-year service lives for our oldest destroyers. I think we'll look at those in a little bit more micro detail as we get closer to make sure the business case is there. As we're seeing, though, with cruisers, there is a point where extending these older ships does become the cost is not worth the benefit, particularly if we don't have the ship maintenance enterprise working at full efficiency. And so my other expectations, we drive ship maintenance effectiveness and efficiency higher. That may allow us to extend those ships without breaking the budget.
Okay, and you've brought up an important point, the shipyard availabilities. I know we're making progress on that, and I appreciate that. How is the pilot program, though, going that will use procurement funding? And have you learned any lessons at this point that might be applied to other major programs?
Yes, sir. One, thanks for the support of Congress to put that pilot in place. I think it will be an important pilot for us. We're a little bit early in that pilot because it's just in the first year. The Navy is committed to fund that pilot in the budget, so we moved the money commensurate with the money that was moved in last year's budget. So as we work through that, I think we'll get efficiency. One, we won't go through the fiscal year boundary issues that we have with O&M. And two, it gives us a little more flexibility as we gain efficiency in these availabilities. We can then reapply those funds quickly to future availabilities. My commitment after another year or two is report back to Congress, and then we can decide whether to scale, sustain, or stop.
Okay, please do. Thank you. And lastly, on the Ready Reserve Fleet, excuse me, given that over half the Sea Fleet will be unusable by the mid-2030s, I'm concerned that we're not seeing a more significant investment in recapitalizing the fleet. So what percentage of the MARAD and MSC fleets does it make sense to overhaul? And Admiral Burke, do you have a perspective on this also?
I'll say from the acquisition side, we've got to work together with Congress. The initial cost to replace those as new build ships without some of the initiatives yet in place to revitalize a commercial shipbuilding industry put those ships as very expensive ships. And I don't believe we want to be putting $500 million into new builds. I don't think that's the right strategy. We're doing some near-term mitigations in terms of additional service life extensions, and as spoken about earlier, some purchases of used ones. I think we've got to work together to find the right balance. New construction isn't off the table, but until we can come up with an affordable way to do that, I don't think replacing that whole fleet with brand new construction ships is going to be the answer either. We've just got work to do together to find the right balance.
Sir, I would echo what Secretary Gertz said. First of all, absolutely agree that sea lift is incredibly critical to our efforts. And with what we know right now, we are applying a balanced approach. We've put significant money towards operation and sustainment funding for the sea lift fleet in the PB21 budget as a first measure. We're also applying the performance to plan types of techniques to everything that we're doing in the day-to-day efforts. And and shoring up those practices. We ran the turbo activation exercise that you refer to. That was Navy initiated, the fourth one of the year that we put a lot of money towards to validate what we thought was a readiness deficit so that we could go after this. So the results were not surprising. We wanted to know this so that we could go after it. I think the balanced approach, though, consists of going after the maintenance, getting better at that, making it more cost-effective, more efficient, going after the service life extensions for the ships that have reasonable life after that. We did 6 last year. We're doing 10 this year. We'll do more next year. We're on track to do that. And then it's a mix of buy used and buy new. So as you know, thank you for the authorities to do the incremental funding on the new ship. We have money in PB21 that'll work towards a 23 layout for a new construction that'll deliver in 26, the first one of a new class. And then the used ships, will follow suit. We've got the authorities all in place and lined up for the first purchase, and the second purchase this year, and then another one following year, 7 in total right now. So I think we're in good shape down that track. As we learn more about what's in the art of the possible and the new construction, we'll figure out the balance. And Chairman Garamendi's brought forward some interesting proposals of working through industry to help us with that new construction piece, and we're really looking forward to working with the committee on that.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Houlihan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for coming today. My questions have largely to do with shipbuilding, as I come from Pennsylvania, and we have both private and Navy shipyards in Philadelphia and small businesses that support the naval shipbuilding industry. The Navy has been using the Engineering Readiness and Assessment Team program for over a decade, employing retired sailors as contractors to help current crews maintain Navy ships and train their crews. These programs seem to have different requirements on the East and West Coasts and are routinely exposed to funding and contractual instabilities. So my question is, why are there different contracts and requirements and funding, and why are they not aligned under one command and resource sponsor to ensure more predictable funding and consistency throughout the fleet?
Yes, ma'am. I just became aware of that issue, so I'd like to take that for the record. I'll go look at the acquisition strategy. Why do we have multiple contracts and multiple standards? And if okay, come back with you in a more detailed response and address the issue. I agree there should not be different requirements and different performance standards.
Perfect. Thank you very much. The Navy also has struggled to forecast ship depot maintenance costs and requested congressional approval to reprogram about $1 billion to cover shortfalls in FY19 and 20. What are we doing to better predict the costs of maintaining Navy ships?
Yeah, when as we've been digging into this fairly complex system, one of the key contributors to extending both the cost and the delays in the availabilities was poor planning on the front end. We struggle a little bit to submit a budget 2 years ahead of execution, but that's not an excuse for not planning it right from the start. So we've taken kind of a big data approach to that, updated our data models so that we're taking much more into account on what is really driving those delays, whether it's port loading or availability of skilled workers or all the other associated factors. That new model so far has delivered 5 on 5 on time. For this fiscal year, that's part of what's getting us from a 30% to 70%. I'd be lying if I said it was perfect, but I think that's informing, and we've rolled our 21 budget and out using that model. No, it's still a dynamic thing. I would expect we may have small reprogrammings as we get through execution in a year if we find something really unexpected, but $1 billion a year swing should not be a kind of standard business.
Excellent. My next question is that the Navy has recently met its goal of employing 37,000 public shipyard workers. Are you confident, and I believe I asked a very similar question last year, that you have the right mix between management and skilled trades, and when do you plan to complete the next wage grade study to ensure that the balance is right?
Yes, ma'am. So I think, yes, we hired ahead. So the good news is we've got the workers here. We actually got them there using a lot of the authorities that this subcommittee and others have given us for direct hiring authority. That's good. Our challenge is they're relatively inexperienced, about 50% less than 5 years, but our opportunity is they're relatively inexperienced and they're digital natives. So our main focus right now is getting them trained up and proficient. Let me also get back to you for the record on when we'll do the next wage grade study there, but that's something we continue to look at. We're doing the same thing on the Fleet Readiness Center from the aviation side as well.
And how does this budget invest to better leverage and expand private shipyard capacity?
So again, some of that is in how we plan the contracts, which I've talked about. I've been meeting now quarterly with all the CEOs from ship repair so that the Vice and I actually sit down with them about once a quarter to really get the business environment correct. We got into a just-in-time contract award, one contract at a time. That's not efficient. So we're trying to find the right balance of competition, yet enough planning horizon. I think one of the things that's helping is grouping maintenance, so you'll win, say, 3 destroyers back-to-back so that you can hire a workforce, they can get proficient, and that will help us both drive schedule efficiency as well as drive costs down through that efficiency.
And I apologize. Oops, is my time up? My time is up. So many questions. Thank you. I yield back.
There is a hearing or a briefing going on for all members of the House having to do with the coronavirus, and so many members of this committee are attending that. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think that briefing also has to do with the economic realities of what's happening out there as well, and that's one of the things I know we as a committee will be wrestling with as we write the NDAA is what are the actual revenues going to be, and what timeline is that based on, and having an election coming up in November. As much as none of us like CRs and as much as you don't like CRs, if I were a betting man, I would bet that you end up having to operate under a CR until after the election is over. Well, I'd rather be honest and Mr. Gertz, I'm going to say this does not apply specifically to this meeting. I did speak with Dr. Roper yesterday. I like Dr. Roper. I think he's a great man. I think we're fortunate to have people like Dr. Roper and yourself that will work for the government, knowing the opportunities that are outside. It's every bit as patriotic as the people out there fighting with the guns every day, in my opinion. And I do want to mention this, though. I'm concerned with some of the more advanced technologies that as we move to things like ABMS, that the other branches are not engaged during the development aspect of things. Army's Future Command came out and said a couple of months ago, hey, ABMS looks great for the Air Force, but not sure to work for us. We understand now the Air Force is bringing the Army in the development. And I have a concern about, as we develop these advanced weapon systems, if these advanced systems as a whole, if they're going to be operated by one branch and serve the other branches, that there's not more coordination in the development of those systems.
Representative Scott, if you don't mind, if I could take that one.
Yes, sir.
I've been kind of leading our coordination efforts for the Navy at this stage, since we're not actually quite in the acquisition phase yet. And I will tell you that the teamwork with the Air Force, initially developed the concept of what's now being called Joint All-Domain Command and Control, which is the name of the concept that's going to give us this superhighway, the cell phone network, if you will, that allows us to use sensors as a service, weapons as a service, platforms as a service, any weapon system, any any platform can talk to each other. The ABMS is one thing that would plug into it. And I think we've gotten Army's concerns addressed by them understanding they could plug their own command and control module into this network as well. But our teamwork has been pretty good, and actually the management of this is going to be taken up to the joint level, managed by the vice chairman, so that each service has a piece of this that they're bringing into the fight.
Admiral, I appreciate your comments, and I hate being on a 5-minute clock, but I do want to point out that the head of Army's Futures Command publicly stated, and now I understand they've walked back those comments some, but just as a member of Congress, it bothers me when I see the head of Army's Future Command say, hey, the Air Force is developing all this stuff and it won't work for us. And when we do these advanced things and these development of things, there's got to be the coordination of all the branches and what it's going to look like.
Absolutely, and that coordination is taking place now. And whether the Army chooses to use this piece or not, we're going to make it so that becomes not an major investment decision, and also the rest of the component works. So if that makes sense.
I'm just saying that decision should be made earlier.
Early, yes,
and
sir.
all of the branches should be involved more from the conceptual development than to have, I forget exactly what, the multiple generals in Futures Command that are pretty high ranking, made a pretty public statement about a system that's actually going to operate out of my.
And that's the great advantage of having brought it up to the vice chairman of the joint staff level, so that we can get it kind of adjudicated, make sure everyone's on board with it, that it works for all. And so I think we're on a good track, sir.
What's it?
Mr. Scott has raised a very, very important question that we need to pay attention to, not only this committee, but in the other committee and in the full committee. With that, I'm going to make an ending statement here. We do have another subcommittee to which we belong that is also meeting at this same moment. Ms. Houlihan, you had a question.
General, I just have one more question, and I want to commend you for the actions that you have done to design a force that's more suitable to deter China. And I think I'm speaking for most of us when I say I'm eager to figure out what the final Marine Force design will look like. And one of the things that I wanted to ask is, as the Corps develops the expeditionary advanced base ops concept, I'm wondering what challenges you are facing for command and control in this contested environment.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Just first on the force design piece, the Commandant is in the process of briefing all the committee chairs and ranking members, and so we look forward to sharing that information with you shortly. The challenge of expeditionary advanced base operations really is, or any operation in the Pacific, has to do with the distance involved. So sustainment and some of the points that have been made earlier are key, as well as a resilient command and control network that gets into the joint all-domain command and control, but also for components to have resiliency should some of those capabilities be denied. That is to say, an overall joint capability with the ability to fall back to a secondary system that will allow those forces to continue to work at the operational level as well.
Yes, this issue of command and control systems and the integration amongst the various branches is going to be on all of our minds here, and particularly what's the future Marine Corps going to look like. That brings us back to the sustainment issues, which we've had many discussions about. I'm not going to go into these in details. We've covered these in meetings and briefing sessions. The Fallon training range, we want to get that done this year, and so pay attention to that. On the sea lift, we've discussed that several times, and we'll be working on that, and specific proposals will be made for the NDAA, and we'll need feedback. Also, Admiral Burke, the question arises as to dry dock capacity everywhere, particularly on the West Coast. And if it is in short supply, as we have heard, what are the plans to deal with that? If you can get back to us on that, it would be appreciated. F-35 will be the subject of another probably joint committee hearing a little later on as to what to do with the F-35. The depot issues, we've discussed those. Those will continue to be on our mind as we go through this coming year. We've talked about the fleet response plans. That also, we want to continue to be brought on a regular basis up to date on the private shipyard program and how you're going to change the work orders on that. And I know that that's been discussed. You talked about it here today in brief. Those are the many of the key issues. We'll be in touch with you on all of that. And for all of us, we'll be paying attention to the pandemic and what we need to do. This is one example of holding hearings people can watch on TV and communicate that way, and staff similarly social distancing, which brings us to the next hearing. I see that our colleagues are completed here. Thank you so very much for your testimony. We continue to look forward to working with you.